Hi everyone, welcome to Book 2, Night 18 of the Orphan's Tales Live reading series. Is it over yet? Like, the pandemic and quarantine and 2020 election, is it over? Can it be over? I'm done. I'm tired of it. I would like things to be over. Really hoping that like this whole garbage year is just what we have to go through to like pay off karmically the election by some miracle not being the end times. Like, that's the only way I can kind of make it work out in my head. Remember in March when we just started this thing and thought, man, maybe we'll get through the first book, but probably not. Ooh, whew, so long ago. Such innocent children we were. And now here we are knee deep in Basilisks and September. And everything's still hot roast garbage. So yeah, I would like it to be over now. If you guys could just get on that, that would be awesome. I don't have anything else. Sunday is, I don't know, Sunday's always been the sads day in my world. And this has really helped that, actually, because at least I have something I have to be doing. Like, I had to do something with my face to make it not a nightmare and come on Instagram Live for you guys. So that's more than I usually can pull off on a Sunday night. But yeah. I don't know, you guys. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to an imaginary world like Mr. Rogers used to do.
I don't know that.
And Alexa, no one asked you. You're not part of this. I don't know what her problem is. It's not wine tonight, by the way. It's blueberry juice and vodka. It's a Mainer. And hopefully our electronic friend over there will not feel the need to butt in anymore. Okay, so, as usual, for legal reasons, this is not an audiobook of the Orphan's Tales. This is a one-woman show. You can get music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can buy copies of them at your local independent bookseller's web portal. If you'd like to patronize mine, it is printbookstore.com. That's in Portland, Maine. You can find me on Twitter at Valente. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Valente. Big essay about those shark tweets is coming up tomorrow. And you can ask me questions when the reading is over, though it works better if you think of what you might want to ask before I stop reading so we don't have any dead air. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valente Live. How many times have I done this? I don't have it down yet. At Cat Valente Live on YouTube. And if you are so moved, you can toss a coin to your witch in the tip jar on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, or on my website at CatherynneMValente.com. It's been just a brutal year for freelancers in general. For a lot of us, it's not that we're not working, it's that we're not getting invoiced. We're not invoicing, or invoices are being not answered. So anything that you can contribute is deeply appreciated by this household as we struggle through the end of the year. And anyone who contributes, I will thank you by name on the next stream. It's not necessary, you don't have to. These are all free from me to you, but if you would like to help us out, that would be awesome. All right, let's get into it. Thank you guys for sticking this out as long as you have. You realize that when we're done with this, we will have together read 1,000 pages of fiction over a little more than 6 months. That is incredible. I'm not sure that I know of another thing like this. Like, man, I want to quit sometimes. It's a hard and strange thing to pull off. All of this, and I know that I will look back on it, and I will, when I think of 2020, I am so often going to think of this little frame of my own dumb face in this little frame, in this wallpaper, and where it says live in pink up there and all your names, and that will be sort of part of my visual memory of this year for the rest of my life. Which is an odd thing to think about, but it really is true. So let's get into the red and the gold. For those of you following along at home, we are on page 317. And here we go with the tale of the two Duchesses continued. It hurt so much, the Basilisk moaned. There was so much blood and fire. I stumbled and retched for days, the taste of my own tongue still slick in my mouth. Finally, though, there was no art in it. I found a lumbering lizard and turned him to stone, and took his tongue, which faded into sandstone even as I closed my beak over it. The fire still in my blood fused the stone to the flesh, but it is a weak join. He shuffled from one stone foot to the other. That was a long time ago, but it still bleeds. The stone chafes the skin. What vile women, Orpheus cried. Why would they have done such a thing to you? What possible reason? All creatures have their reasons, which no other creature divines. But in these later evenings, I wonder if they were not part weasel, with their fur just hidden away. Can you not see this pair? Walking through the early evening light, which is so famous, the cool blues which fall across the crimson stones. It is here the flautists play an interlude in a minor key, and all folk weep. In the months to come, Orpheus washed the basilisk wounds and rubbed salve into the places where his mitre cut the scales, and ground his tongue to smooth on the whetstone near the stables of the Duke's palace. In time the Duke died, and still Ulissa did not desire to return to the palace, and Orpheus did not desire to return to her mother's shop. And so Orpheus, too, became a duchess, and a blue sash was strung from her shoulder to her hip, and a bonny sword appended to her side. Yet the Duchess of Agenab did not tell her friend Ulissa about the beast, for she longed for a thing which was hers alone, which she did not have to share with the beautiful soprano, whose name rose and rose as she sang the greatest parts yet written for the stage, Sigrid, Zmea, Dapple, Diamond, whose part is so high and sorrowing that only the most discerning can hear the notes. The two women were as dear as ducats to one another, but each did keep to her own things. And where Orpheus had her mangled beasts, Ulissa had a butcher's boy who made her meat pies every Tuesday morning, and once killed a stag just for her. The Basilisk, for his part, was fascinated by Orpheus' stubborn refusal to turn to stone. At first he tried to catch her unaware, for she was always so careful to wear her weasel skin dress. And though the smell of it distressed him, he learned to catch the scent of her underneath the weasel, something very like damp lilies crushed beneath a cartwheel. After a long while, he stopped trying to taste her, and finally began to look for her coming to his little courtyard full of persimmons and coconuts, and waited, and leapt into her arms when she arrived, rolling in the dust with her, and biting her playfully about the arms. He told her terrible, outlandish tales of the misdeeds of weasel and the glorious genealogies of basilisks and their great sculptures. She told him about her advisors, and her suitors in their silly suits of armor, and her vials of perfume, and how many owners her sword had known before her. She fed him crickets and squirming squirrels, and once he brought her a stone stag, just for her, tall antlers flashing red and rough. But even these merry duets cannot last forever. Though you ought to hear the castrato we have to play the butcher's boy, at a day dawned stormy and flat, as skies will be when the rain is near, so near as to smell it, but not quite arrived. The basilisk was rolling on his back, snuffling the wind, reveling in the wet mud smell of the coming showers. And he saw in the corner of his eye a woman running through the persimmon trees, her hair flapping behind her, golden as apples, her dress dark and thick and furred, her smell like damp lilies beneath a cartwheel. He chortled in his beastly joy and waddled happily toward her, his ambling gait stomping heavily stone onto stone. He could not quite catch her, and her hair teased him, streaming bright as lightning in the dark clouds. Finally, he clamped the edge of her trailing dress under his claws and hooted triumph in his reptilian way. The woman stumbled and turned to look at him, at what had caught her, golden hair framing her face like a fine fur, and turned to stone. Her eyes went last, closing into sandstone with a hurt and puzzled expression. We can only imagine her final cry, the voice which set the opera of Agenab alight. Then silence. The basilisk was frightened and baffled. The woman looked just like his Orpheus, smelled like her, but where was her dress? Why would she wear stoat fur instead of weasel? Did she not love him any more? Did she not call him her best and only beast? Her beloved monster? Had he not let her grind his very tongue against her stone? She had abandoned him, betrayed him. Perhaps she meant to send him away, but thought so little of him that she had simply forgotten. She was duchessing about without him, and cared nothing at all for how he might miss her. What had he done? How had he given offense? The basilisk wept. He howled in the storm, and the thunder quailed. He called her name over and over, but she did not come. His tears streamed fire into the cobble cracks, and he struck his stone claws against the trees until the ground was wet and slick with fallen fruit. He'd done nothing. He'd loved her better than she deserved. Perhaps it was not a dress after all, but she herself who was wicked, weasel, seducing him to complacency so that she could feast on his backbone. Well, he'd shown her, hadn't he? The basilisk wept, but he had loved her. He had eaten from her hand. She told him how stupid the suitors who came bearing flowers and baronies were. She'd stroked his pate beneath the mitre. He had laid his head on her lap. The basilisk lay on the earth and keened in rage and grief and loneliness, keened until his stone tongue fell from his mouth and he could keen no more. Holding his grief before him like a lamp, the basilisk left the city of Agenab, and holding his rage before him like a pike, he stared hard at everything he passed: fence posts, stables, windmills, basil fronds, garlic patches, red pepper fields and black pepper fields, the green peppers and the pink, the cinnamon groves, the coriander fields and the saffron fields, the cumin farms, the salt flats with their crystals like hard cutting snow, the mustard plants, the paprika bushes, the vanilla beans, thin and dark on the vine. The tale of the cage of ivory and the cage of iron continued. It is said that somewhere beyond the blasted, stone-struck fields of Agenab there is a clear mountain pool with the most extraordinary figure crouched over it, a terrifying stone serpent, covered in stone feathers, with a mitre on his head and tears in his eyes, staring into the water like a mirror. What you see at the foot of the stage is our memorial to the greatest voice ever to grace the opera ghetto, Ulissa, who was a duchess twice over, sweet Ulissa, dead for the lack of a dress. Arioso finished with a flourish and bowed deeply. You know that isn't what happened. Agrafena rolled her eyes. Who's to say it isn't? The jackal-headed tenor said indignantly. I am. No basilisk could have blighted every field, yet every field perished. Ah, but the root systems, Fina dear, the root systems. The stone would have spread, even if you could never see it in the withering leaves, and no city garden was touched, only the wide and ox-tilled fields. He crossed his arms over his chest in satisfaction and turned to me. When Orphea discovered what had happened, for of course Ulissa had been caught in his gaze and mistaken for her friend. Without tragic mistakes of identity, where would the theater be? She went mad with grief for both of them, for her city which was blasted and broken, and perhaps, just perhaps, the mad duchess wanders the city to this day, mourning by the riverside. Is it not a marvelous tale? I agreed that certainly it was. If you are finished, we must go, Arioso, the violinist insisted. Yes, to the roost and the river with you. You are taking her by the riverway, aren't you? It's the best and loveliest route. But promise you'll come back and play for the Duchesses this year. Swear it. No one can play the basilisk dirge like you. And bring your audience with you. She's a pearl among empty seats. Arioso kissed both of us noisily on our cheeks, though his kiss went straight through my smoke and returned to the stage, where the beautiful sea set was being struck and a forest raised in its place, with leaves all of ladies cast off spring veils. Agrafena did indeed take me by the riverside, the Vareni, which flowed through the corners of the city, cutting deep into the layered streets, as though Agenab had always been there, and the river, a latecomer, had had to make do with grinding down avenues and boulevards instead of hills and mountains. The thoroughfares arched over the water like battered cliffs, their undersides curving sharply away from the current. Leering lanes had long ago crumbled into little red deltas, where ramshackle fishing huts and lock houses had been built onto the ruins of what might have once been a grocer's alley. The water of the Vareni, which rushed and burbled, was of every conceivable color. In Kosh, where everything is more or less fire-colored, red and golden and black and white and the occasional blue, but here it was crashing, waving water in rose and emerald and cobalt, stark yellow and depthless black, white and scarlet and orange, indigo and silver, gold and flashing, peaking turquoise. Even in the inky, starless night the colors gleamed. The whole thing whirled by, eddying and swirling, sending up a rainbow of spray against the docks and finger piers which jutted out into the water, for the Vareni was a warm and swift-flowing river, treacherous and deep. Agrafena watched it go by for a moment, and chuckled at my astonished stare. Up north side, she pointed, is the dressmaker's parish. For centuries upon centuries they ran their cloth through the headwaters of the Vareni, the final wash of the dye. All those colors leached into the water, and even though there is but one lonely spider up there now, weaving her ball gowns still, the colors are fast and the Vareni is bright. She led me down to the waterside, to a tall and spindly bell tower which had no bell, though several suspect shards of bronze lay shattered around its base. A warm light seemed to flicker inside, but I could not be sure. Water like blood licked the stairs. This is where I leave you, Agrafena said, drawing out one side of her long hair and playing a few slow, jagged notes. When you will, find me in my courtyard again, and I will take you back to Simeon's hands. She walked away, her red dress swaying, and her feet kicked a few swift dancing steps as she disappeared behind a thin little chapel with a kicked-in door. I turned to the bell tower, the roost, I supposed, and sucked in my breath. The Vareni smelled like fish and linen. The door was no more than a gaping arch, and I ducked inside, drifting up the long curving stairs, my smoke behind me like a shadow. In the upper rooms, by the light of my own flames, I could see a great ivory cage, burned black by the blazing tail of a firebird, who lay sleeping within, his wings folded gently over the dozing form of a young girl, whose toes stretched and curled lazily as she dreamed. The ceiling spun away overhead, into the broken bell hook and beyond, and the night poured in. The tale of the waste continued. The veiled woman put her hand on the leopard's head, and the great cat arched her neck to meet the peeling palm, purring as her ears were thoroughly scratched. She does not sicken you? The djinn asked. She does not repulse me, no. She's mine. The leash goes both ways, and her hand can do little to me by now that is not already done. Surprisingly dexterous, Rend pulled a little pack with her soft spotted mouth from her mistress's voluminous black robes and opened the flap, gently drawing a water flask from its depths and a few strips of dried meat and crusted bread. Curling her lips away from the food so as not to moisten it, she pushed it into the cage where Scald chewed it gratefully. She refused the water, however. That I do not need. They mean for me to starve here, not die of thirst. We do not thirst. What fire longs to be quenched. Either way, it will not be long. The leopard shrugged her spotted shoulders. The evening was deeper now, and the scent of weeds and mouse bones were thick on the wind. We find it interesting that you speak of Agenab, for that was the home of my lady before she was stricken. She knows little of what has passed there since she left the red towers for the black spires of Urim. Did you betray your people? Did you do something to keep them from the carnelian box? Rand asked, her whiskers twitching. The Djinn Queen frowned, her orange-lined eyes narrow and angry. And then she laughed, harsh and hoarse, golden tears showing at the corners of her eyes, where the fire made filigree patterns as she shook her head. That silly box. If only they'd told me what was in it. But then I suppose generals are always foolish, no matter how dazzling the host they command. But I would not call anything I did betrayal, no more than it was betrayal to tell no djinn but the highest about Kashkash's true nature, or keep a queen ignorant of her own war. I meant no offense, the cat said, and the djinn glared not at her but at the woman with black veils, whose cool, sad eyes returned the gaze. She did not move, and after a long while the djinn sighed. I think you and your mistress are both impatient. I will come to the box and the cage in time if you will give me leave to meander in the Ajahn alleys of my tale. The tale of the cage of ivory and the cage of iron continued. The floor of the cage was filled with cushions trimmed in fused tassels on rich gold thread. The child was resting on a lovely blue brocade, and she turned in her sleep, pulling up the firebird's wing over her shoulder like a blanket. His neck was curled protectively around her, banked and glowing, his beak polished brass, sticking out between the blackened bars of the cage. The door swung open and free, and with the breathing of the pair, the whole thing swayed back and forth on the frame that held it up a ways above the dusty floor. "Hello," I said softly, for my voice echoed like a scream against the red walls. The bird stirred, and his eyes slid open lazily, shimmering eyelids drooping. The child moaned softly, and her aviary caretaker hushed her. "Go back to sleep, my dovelet. It's only a djinn come to see Papa." I saw her head fall back to its pillow, and soon enough the contented sounds of a child sleeping drifted out of the cage. The firebird gently extricated himself from the child and hopped out of the cage. He was huge, the size of a young elephant, his plumage all the familiar hearth colors, deep red and orange forefeathers down to the creamy sear white underfeathers, and his tail was aflame. Unlike the djinn, the tail of a firebird is the only thing which is truly afire. Long tail feathers like those of a peacock, tipped in curls of fire and marked in intricate, blistering designs. As he woke, the flame wound up from sweet ember to soft roar, and I thought him beautiful in that moment, for fire, as ever and always, speaks to fire. "You must hush," he said, his voice like a green branch falling into ash. "My daughter needs sleep." "Your daughter? She's human." "The ways of this world are strange and dear, my little flint strike. My daughter she is, doubt it not." "Simeon sent me to you. I understand now what he meant, a flame like my own." "Now, why in the world would he do a thing like that?" The great bird pushed his head to one side, as if considering a pile of seed. "I'm looking for a box of carnelian." "I'm sure I haven't anything like that. But if you care to look, just keep soft on your feet." No, I'm sure it would be hidden. But Simeon seemed to think I should see you." I looked down, already a little ashamed of what trespassed outside Simeon's embrace. "Did you know there's an army outside? They'll attack tomorrow or the day after." The bird fluffed his wings. "The whole city stinks of them. Even kings and queens sweat and their swords weep, and I can smell the cannon even now. And you have their mire all over you, so I am reasonably certain I know you too. I'm sure Simeon means for me to tell you a great many things, in hopes that you will think well enough of us to not smoke us out like rats. But I am not sure at all that I care to speak to you, and I certainly know nothing about your ridiculous little box." "Please," I whispered. "I only have till dawn. I have been queen for no more than a day. It is not my fault. Tell me why you are in a cage with a little girl, and perhaps in your tale I can find their box." The firebird glowered and finally settled down onto the floor, his flaming face very close to mine. "Are you lost?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said fervently. Poor lost things are a specialty of mine. And here we have our firebird. The Tale of the Cloak of Feathers. Call me Lantern. and don't laugh. I was always gentle, always. I was a sweet little flame in a glass. I was never a devouring blaze. That is for you, and your kind, and your army, and your cursed little box. That was for him. The wizard was holding my feather when I flew into the turret room. I knew he would be. I had felt his hands on my fringe for years, waiting for a need. The moon was a slash on his collar when I alighted on the sill, pale and sharp. Need stood in the corner, with a great round belly swathed in an elaborate yellow coat, the color of daffodils with the first sunlight of all sunlights on their petals. It was epauletted in gold, and spangled in gold, and buttoned in gold, and belted in gold. The lapels were fringed in green so bright it wearied the eye, and his stockings and high-heeled boots matched to the toe. He had a thin, long sword with a graceful basket looped into his belt, festooned with ribbons, the expensive, poised kind of sword that lets one know immediately that the bearer doesn't mean anything by it. He had a black wig that glossed and curled opulently to his waist, and over his face he wore an angular dancing mask painted in gold leaf like a manuscript, with extraordinary peacock feathers fanning out from the hollow eye sockets, their dazzling fronds bedecked with violet eyes. The mouth was a horrid little slit. In his green-gloved hand was a sack of spices, so rich and fragrant they had wet the bag through and filled the room with heady scents. Listen well, my young partridge. This is Kostya of Varenicide, and he will so shortly be the possessor of your feather, and you must be a good little parakeet and obey him as well as you have obeyed me by flying all the way here in the dark and the cold and leaving such a lovely, live goose crying in your wake. There's no need to gloat, Omir, said Kostya, his voice hollowed by the slit in his mask, but still eel-soft and insinuating. It is poor form. I'm sure he is quite wretched enough without your help. I shall take him and keep him dry, and feed him so many charming things to eat. All the mice he could hope to gobble up, served on platters of glass and gold. You'd like that, wouldn't you, Valente? The man in the yellow coat put his hand on my wing, and it seemed to writhe beneath the glove. I shuddered, and my colors flared worry and warning, blue on white. I said nothing. The deal had been struck, and the wizard took his bag of spices, inhaling with delight. Kostya of Varenicide stroked the edge of my feather with an intimate little sigh, his breath ragged and rattled as he fingered the fringes, and then he opened the door of the tall ivory cage and gestured inside. And what could I have done? The journey to Agenab was a long one, and to the rim of the desert the best route is by river. Being a river man of long acquaintance, Kostya chartered a lavish barge the color of pumpkins and blood, and I was set in my cage at the prow to watch the foaming green rivers of the mountain country gurgle by. The barge teetered under my weight, but held without too much complaint. The river was wider than I had expected. I could see the far green shores lit up with fireflies and spackled with mosquitoes, but they were not very near at all. And the water foamed brown and weedy around the barge. Beside me on the deck sat a large glass goblet set into a firm wooden hold. In the goblet was a fat goldfish, snapping her veil-thin tail around her. Her scales caught the river light, and her black eyes blinked slowly, one after the other. The cut crystal turned her skin into prisms. "Are you enjoying the river?" she said, her voice bubbling in the water. "I could speak to the poleman if the flow is not smooth enough." "I barely feel the motion of the river," I said gloomily. "It is as smooth as I could ask for, but I did not ask, and I do not wish to go where the river wends." "Oh, I am sorry. It is the nature of animals to be caged and cupped whenever a curious man happens by. This is tragic, but one must take a philosophical outlook. The river is long. The glass is fragile." I ground my beak. Agenab is wide, and the cage is strong. The fish brightened. Her scales shimmered with pleasure. "Are you going to Agenab?" "I'm only taking you so far as the river wanders." "How lovely. I have relatives in Agenab, you know." "How wonderful for you." "I am not looking forward to it. The peacock man in the yellow coat says he will feed me mice there, but I think a man with a longing to feed mice to birds may pursue that interest anywhere. If he wants to take me by river to a city I have hardly heard of, there will be more than mice when we arrive. But the river there tastes like palm sugar. I do love these cold mountain roots. When the night is very blue, I think of the Vareni and how it would have felt in my mouth. She turned lazily in her water, brushing the glass with her fins. Every morning they pour me out into this river, and I taste the water. It's like frozen moss this far up in the heights. I taste its current and its depth, the direction of its flow. I find the safe channel. I discover whether or not the trout are spawning this month. And they scoop me back up into my glass, and I chart their course of the flavors of the river. They might have given you a bigger glass. Men are inconsiderate. I'm sure they believe my wine goblet to be an ocean bounded in glass. But I am the pilot of this barge, and they can do nothing without me. Her face, such as a fish's face may be, turned mischievous and sly. But once, you know, I was a dragon. I laughed. The sound rang out over the quick water. You must have been the smallest dragon ever to pick a maiden's apron from your claws. She colored angrily. Don't laugh. I was a dragon. Bigger than you are by far. And we will pick up there tomorrow with The River Pilot's Tale, which is one of my very favorite parts of the story, and the only thing of mine that has yet to be made into has actually been made into a film. We talked about this way back in March, that there is a short film with puppets that was made of The River Pilot's Tale. That I have the DVD in my cabinet, and in which the lantern is played by Ahmed Best, who you know better as Jar Jar Binks. So I actually have a message from Jar Jar Binks on my phone that I saved from ages back, saying how much he loved my book. So yeah, I have my little puppeteering movie of The River Pilot's Tale. So that one I do remember a lot about. So the river with all the colors, that comes straight from Kyoto. They had the kimono dyeing factory at the headwaters of the river outside the city, and or up at the upriver, and they would rinse all the clothes in it. And so the river in Kyoto was always running with all these crazy colors back in the day, and I was so taken with that image that I used it for the colorful river here, and then for the river of coats and clothes in Palimpsest. So the thank you to that tour guide in Kyoto who bore many book details with her narration that day. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm excited to do The River Pilot's Tale. I want to be sure we do that all in the same reading, so that there's not a break between. So, and you just, I guess a little bit early today. We're doing between 15 and 20 pages a night, so we'll get there soon. We're less than 200 pages to the end. Craziness. All right, well, I'll do my outro. If you have any questions, you can pop them up in the chat. As always, this has not been a audiobook of The Orphan's Tales for legal reasons. This is a play. You can find music based on this book at sjtucker.com. You can get copies of it at your local independent bookseller's web portal. My local independent bookseller is printbookstore.com if you want to support them. And you can find me on Twitter at Cat Valente. You can find me on Patreon at Cat Valente. Big essay going up tomorrow. And a new music project, I think, that we're going to be starting on the Patreon, so check it out. And you can catch up in the archive on YouTube, which is Cat Valente Live. That's the name of the channel. And if you are so moved, you can contribute to the tip jar on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, or my website, which is catherinemvalente.com. You don't have to. These are all free, but times are really tight for all artists and freelancers, and anything you can contribute is deeply appreciated. This has been a pretty huge outlay of energy and time, and I'm so happy to have done it. But anything that you can throw in there to support me still being able to do it for the next several weeks would be awesome. Thank you, and I will thank you by name on the next stream. What am I playing? Still Animal Crossing. Yes, I'm still playing Animal Crossing. I had kind of gone off it for a little while. Now I'm kind of back into it. My kid really likes to watch me play it to catch fishies. Yeah, I'm still playing Animal Crossing. I'm also playing the Final Fantasy VII reboot right now and kind of poking at a replay of Kingdom Hearts. I really unironically love the Kingdom Hearts game, and I know that the fandom is eccentric for that one. I'm not part of that. I just really like the game. I'm playing those. But Final Fantasy VII Reboot is like way too scary for my child to deal with. So it's not even a game you can sort of put on while he's around. And on a family day or something, it's just too intense. So I sort of am just playing it late in the evening, so it's slow going. Am I going to write about it? I mean, if people choose it, I do on my Patreon, for those of you who don't know. Every month a poll goes up of all the sort of media I've consumed that month, and everybody votes on what I'm going to review. So if people vote for it, then that's what I'll end up doing. Everyone picked What We Do in the Shadows, the TV series, last month. It was Hamilton the month before that. So I never know what I'm going to review or write about until my patrons tell me. I'll put it on the list for sure. But I don't know if they'll pick it. I thought that they would have. They have not picked what I thought they were going to pick necessarily every time. So I really have no way of predicting it. Yay, kitties and babies. I enjoyed reviewing him. I've really enjoyed writing the reviews. As you can tell, I initially planned for them to be like 2,000 words, and not a one has come in under 4,500, 5,000 words. So I obviously enjoyed doing it, and I used to be a film critic way back in my misspent youth, so I do miss it. It's kind of like having a blog again, only like the people who comment are predisposed to like me already because they're part of my Patreon, so they don't yell at me the way people used to yell at me in my blog if I didn't like something. So it's basically like all the good parts of Live Journal, mine's the bad parts. Okay, well, so if there's no more questions, I will sign off. We will be able to continue this with River Pilot's Tale on Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This will go up in the archive in about a couple hours, and I'll see you then. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. Thank you so much for coming and turning up and caring about things. It's important that we still care about things. I'll see you then.